Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're all going well, as always. I don't think I'd ever not wish people that, but yeah, it's worth saying. Not just to be polite, it's a genuine wish. I hope everyone's going well. Um, Sweet. Yeah, you're also gonna have to excuse me a little bit. I just got out of the shower, so that's why I'm looking a little bit damp. But rest assured, it's been a dry day, so now you know. Um, Sweet. It's actually because I was in the shower that I was having a few thoughts, doing a bit of thinking. I mean, I think anyway, no matter what my environment is. But I was having a few thoughts in the shower, and I thought, this would be a nice way to collect them, and share them because I think some people might find it interesting. Um, I mean, I also think because I've had some of these discussions with people before, and I think some of my ideas that I'm going to talk about was a bit controversial. I know some people disagree. Some people rarely agree. Some people maybe not, don't go too far. So yeah, I'll set some of them out. Um, See how we feel about them. Um, so yeah, and I know a lot of people, not a lot, but a lot of people, but a few people. They've been enjoying some of these before they go to bed. So if you're one of those, hope you get some good sleep. Okay. Um, yeah, what was I thinking about? I think I was thinking about music. Yeah, well, I don't know what I'm saying. I think like I know for a fact that's exactly what I was thinking about. Um, but more specifically, it's like how we feel about it. As people that play music, how do we feel about it? Um, how we play music, how it's taught. Um, I think I got into this because I started thinking about this idea of people being gifted. It's something I heard today. I just thought, what a whole load of rubbish. This idea that you have these gifted people, like they're in an exclusive club, you know. Um, it got me thinking about the fact, we think about, a lot of people think that like music's like this thing that like some of us have and some of us don't, um, which again is pretty ridiculous, I think. But I think that's just the way that music's taught, um, and potentially even in other subjects, I would say. But I think the way music's taught me is that only these, very advanced students absorb the language of music. Um, and I think that's why a lot of people end up falling by the wayside a little bit. Um, I think for a long time, it's not really been given much thought, and people kind of just accept and perpetuate this idea that some of us have it and some of us don't, which I disagree with. I don't think that's true at all. You know, you got loads of cultures where everyone's a musician simply because of the way music's introduced into those people's lives. Um, so yeah, I think this idea that like some of us have it and some of us don't is just not true. Um, and yeah, it kind of got me thinking about how we feel about playing music ourselves. Why people struggle with the way it's taught. I was thinking about how a lot of people give up playing because they don't think they're good enough. Um, I don't know if that's something um, any of you guys have considered before. Um, I know it's certainly something I've thought about before. Sorry, that sounds so pick me, but I'm not saying that in a self-deprecating way. But it's something I've grappled with for sure. Um, and I don't think it's super uncommon, because I've heard it from people. It's other people have had this experience. But it's not a problem with us. I think it's a problem with the mode of study and the way it's taught. You know, I know for myself, I struggle a little bit with focus sometimes. Like having an inability to focus, feeling a bit overwhelmed sometimes. Um, I think these things they used to kind of manifest in a way that made me look a bit lazy or lethargic. And I've worked on it a lot. Um, so hopefully I don't think I've come across like that to a lot of people that know me now. But yeah, I think when I was younger, it used to be something I would struggle with. I think I'd get to the end of the day, not really have anything done, and I'd go to sleep like just regretting it. And I was like, yeah, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna lock in. I'm gonna crack on and get it done. And I'll just get overwhelmed and it wouldn't happen. And it was just this endless cycle. And then I just, I started to look inward and just be like, why am I being so lazy? Um, which isn't true, but yeah, I mean, that's something that continued into music school, I reckon. When I was about 14, 15, um, I used to struggle with comparison, which again, I don't think is that uncommon. I'd hear someone play better than me and I'd be like, jeez, man, like, I'd feel so worthless, which is ridiculous to say out loud, to be honest, but it's true, I used to attach so much value to how to perform on my instrument. It was validation for me. Um, getting to a point where you know you're in an environment where people had equal talent to you, but they were also able to put in long, hard yards, long, hard hours of practice. It's hard. Um, I'd start to feel a little bit like an imposter. Like, yeah, I just feel like, what am I doing here? Um, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous to say out loud. Looking back, I'm like, what are you doing? Um, but that's just how it is. You know, for a lot of people, I think. Um, this concept that the quality of my playing is somehow determination of my self worth. That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts. Um, and this would make me, I would just not enjoy myself, to be honest. Because each day I'm walking around like so anxious because you've got this sort of superlative range of emotion where it's like you're either going to be absolutely anxious or elated, depending on whether I did a good bass solo or not, or something, or improvise well. Because that was like an apparent test of my worth. Um, so I'll be walking around. You'd be so volatile, um, and that's a direct hindrance on my playing. Because I don't think I was ever playing anything of depth really. I was just like spending the whole time just nervous or scared. Um, this went on for a while. And to be honest, I think it's still something I sit with sometimes. But I think I spoke to a friend once about this. Had similar experience, and he shared with me some advice his teacher gave him, which really resonated with me. Um, it sounds a bit novel and it sounded a bit strange at first, but stick with it. Because he was basically saying we need to surrender our most prized possession, which is this sort of obsessive need to sound good, which sounds bizarre, but like he basically framed it in a way where he says he said think of a time where like I really needed to sound good. He was like say like you're at a gig playing a gig and like someone you really respect like walks in, like someone that you really want to impress. Because in those moments you really want to sound good to impress them. And then he asked, he was like, how well do you play under those circumstances? In those situations, how well have you played? And he said every time people's answer is always that it's like a whole system freezes and is like overwhelmed with this desire to sound good. So yeah, he went further than this, and this is kind of what sealed it for me. He went further, and he said he asked, think of times when it didn't matter, when you're playing with your mates that you're all on a good page with, you all trust, you all get on well, or you're playing a low stakes gig when like I don't know, no one's there, no one can hear you. I don't know, you've had a few beers or something, you don't really care. Um, it's every time in those situations you sound great. Um, but, even if you don't, you're not necessarily sounding great. You're not just sounding great, sorry, but you're having a great time. you're having a great time because we play better when it doesn't matter. We play better when it doesn't matter. And so in turn, when we don't try as hard to be good, we play better. Which I think sounds strange at first, and I found it strange at first, but this really helped me. This really helped reframe a lot of the things that I was thinking. I think it sounds strange because it's kind of the opposite of what a lot of people think is true. But I genuinely do believe we play better when it doesn't matter. And when we stop trying so hard to sound good, we end up sounding good. I also think this sounds strange because if you kind of accept that not caring leads to better playing, it's kind of unrealistic in our minds. Because realistically, we're not able to stop caring. I don't think that's really realistic. It doesn't matter how intellectually or spiritually aware you are. It's like it's an involuntary response. We all care. That's fine. We're all still going to be consumed with how good we sound. But it's something I keep working on. And I felt the benefits of it in all areas of my musicianship and the way I practice. Because I can go on stage, play my instrument, and sound awful. I can sound absolutely honking. But afterwards, I'll be kind to myself. Not all the time. Again, it's a constant process. But I can be kind to myself. Which is difficult. It's been difficult for me to get to that place, and it doesn't work out all the time. But I genuinely believe this made me a better player. Because I think when I was worried so much about what I was playing, I wouldn't sound good because I'd never actually commit to what I was playing. Say improvising or playing with people that I want to impress. I'd be so restrained, and like my playing would be so feeble. I'd have a bad tone. It would sound tentative. I'd be so tense. I wouldn't be able to play fast because I'm all tensed up because it lacked so much confidence. Which is why I think we need to be kind to ourselves. Obviously, I think that obviously applies to life as well, not just in music. But in this instance, I think I needed to learn to be kinder to myself when playing music. Letting go of ego made me a better player. Yeah, because I'm not in a position to comment on others. Certainly not. I'm not like. By the way, I'm not saying this like I'm some wise guru. This is simply just like this is how I feel and how I think in my own experience. But I'm gonna comment now on things I observe, and whether people agree or not, I'm not sure. But I see a lot of people that I think they're almost blinded by their ego, and they kind of hinder themselves with their self-centeredness. And I just think, it doesn't matter how good you are, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll park that for now. I don't really want to get into that. Yeah, I remember reading a book. The name escapes me. If I remember it, maybe I'll link it or something. But it was kind of talking about the first time we all touched an instrument and how that would make us feel. I think it was kind of saying like when we first touched an instrument, we just sounded like awful, but like to us, it sounded amazing. Like there was this sort of like magic quality to the sound, and that's the natural process. The sort of stimulation we got from creating that sound and the curiosity about it was growing from that point. And I think the author kind of argued that realistically, if you're left alone, you've got the potential to develop your own relationships to the sounds on that instrument. Like the different octaves or combinations of notes or whatever. And that would have represented something personal to you. And I think think Joni Mitchell does that. I think the book might have said that, use that as an example about. I think Joni Mitchell describes chords by their feelings, not necessarily by the chord, the chord names or the note names or whatever. So I think that's an interesting point. But yeah, it gets onto the fact that like you hit a point where like I don't know, you gotta have a teacher because like I don't know, your parents say so or your school teacher say so, whatever. Um, and then you get a teacher and the magic dies because of the way they're taught. Um, you know, you get a lot of people that express regret at having started an instrument early, but letting it go. I'm sure we all know someone that's like, oh, I wish I kept doing my piano lessons or something. Um, why did they stop? Um, and I think the author kind of argues that that sort of magic feeling, that the bliss of music is filtered out by drab teaching, essentially. Because a lot of the ways music's taught in schools is, it just causes people to tune out, which I think is changing a lot. To be fair, and this isn't the case for anything. I didn't necessarily go as far as the book author on everything. Um, but the one thing I thought was interesting is that when you start to identify music with rules, that's not ideal. That's when people start to tune out. You need to identify music with the actual quality that it brings, which is fun and freedom. And that's why a large majority of people who get serious about music end up playing music they weren't necessarily taught in school. Interesting point. So yeah, to kind of return to the point I was making earlier, got a little bit distracted, I reckon. Um, this sort of idea about not wanting to play bad, I think, is completely understandable. Well, it is understandable because we want to make a living out of this realistically, um, and people aren't going to hire us if we honk at our instrument. That's that's the reality. Um, um, but do we feel as bad when we're alone? But, when the consequences aren't there, when they aren't as high, when there's no pressure to perform. Um, the answer is yes, because as we said before, when we sound bad, we feel bad. When we play good, when we play great, we feel great. Because we judge our value by our level of playing, which is completely unhealthy. Um, it raises the stakes so much, the standards by what it means to us, whether we play badly or well. And then we end up piling immense amounts of pressure onto ourselves, onto the actual act of playing, which is how we actually end up sounding worse. Um, and that's why I think musical life is filled with so much pressure. Again, I'm not speaking for everyone here. It's personal experience and ones I've heard from others. But, like, my own personal experience, musical life is filled with so much pressure, so many doubts, every day. Do I stay in school? Do I continue pursuing this? Should I just settle, be a music teacher, whatever? Should I drop out? Should I drop out and just shed all the time? And I know people that have done that. But it should not be like this. Music is not supposed to be like a source of depression. It's really not. It's the most unbelievable thing in the world. It's absolute elation. It's my favorite thing. And that's why what truly helped me was realizing that just things aren't that deep. Um, reason for living is way more important than playing. Whether like my bass solo sounded good. Once I started realizing this, once I started working on this, I actually started sounding better. Not to glaze, I'm not glazing myself, but I genuinely believe this is true. It's super hard, and I'm still guilty of falling into old traps and negative thinking. But every time I do fall into those traps, it ruins my performance. But it is a constant process and one I'll keep working on. But it's actually not that deep. I mean, if you think about like when we play on other instruments, I love to like thrash around on the drums or something. Or like, I don't know, you play piano and you hop on the drum kit. It's so fun. Like it's actually so fun. We all do this. I know for a fact we all do this and we all love it. Um, and we sound awful, by the way. We sound absolutely awful, but we have such a good time because we're able to let go, because we don't define ourselves as that sort of musician. If you're a piano player, you don't define yourself as a drummer. So when you hop on the kit, you're having a great time because you let go, because you don't call yourself a drummer. Once you start calling yourself a drummer, you're going to have a hard time to enjoy it. Unless you're good, obviously. But you're going to have a hard time to enjoy it because once we define ourselves in that way, we end up forgetting that it's more important to have a good time than to sound good. Not that there's anything wrong with wanting to play good, but that's not what I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with wanting to play good, and that's fine. I want to play good, but needing to play good is the problem, and ends up being counterintuitive. So yeah, I don't think there's much that I've left unsaid. But I'd be interested to see what people think. It's something I think about a lot. I think it's interesting. I think it's important. As long as we all stay well, that's the main thing. So yeah, sweet. I hope you guys go well. Take care of yourselves.